Chattanooga Business Development Center is the home to entrepreneurs, or people in this community who think outside the box. Let's go inside. I want you to see this company called RJM Tacticle. They make Tomahawks for soldiers, but that's not all they do. Wait until you hear their stories, as told from the business owners.
I was a kid that was always interested in weapons. I was the kid that was dressed up like a ninja running through the woods when I was 9. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, my father brought home 2 books. He was in sales and traveled and brought home Swords and Blades of the American Revolution and Ben Hunt's Guide to Indian Craft. And they were 2 books that were very influential to me. Ben Hunt's Guide to Indian Craft had all kinds of just amazing projects of Indians type stuff. The Swords and Blades of the American Revolution had a whole section on tomahawks, and that really struck me to the core. I just loved the lines of them. I loved the history of them. When I was 11, going on 12, I was at my grandparents' house. They had a painting of a blacksmith shop. And I just had an epiphany moment where I looked at that painting of a blacksmith shop and I thought, if I had a blacksmith shop, I can make all the weapons and tomahawks I wanted. And so it kind of started from there. I went home from my grandparents' house and started gathering books on blacksmithing and going to flea markets and looking for tools. You know, when I first started, I was forging on a piece of railroad track and a hibachi grill to heat metal up with, and I was hammering on it outside my parents' house. I had quite a few years of trial and error just playing with historical pieces. You have to remember, originally I made 18th century type tomahawks, stuff you'd find in the French and Indian War or American Revolution. So I had a lot of experience playing with those types of tomahawks, cutting things with those type of tomahawks. So when the gentleman from Special Operations called up and said, hey, you know, we would like to make a tomahawk, I already had a pretty good idea of what would work and what wouldn't.
We make and manufacture and design tactical tomahawks. And those are tomahawks that are primarily used by our special forces, military, law enforcement, and just outdoor enthusiasts as well. Tomahawks have been given a real bad rep by Hollywood. And folks look at a tomahawk and say, oh, that was a killing weapon. They were used for scalping. Well, they were never used for scalping. And back in the day, they were a multi-purpose tool. They were used for chores, they were used for preparing food, leather, the habitat. They also made a pretty good weapon, but they were used every day. And in today's world, and the uses are shifting somewhat, but we have found since we started making the tactical tomahawks, the breaching and rescue tool, the capabilities that the Tomahawk has for that is really second to none, because they're lightweight, they're very efficient in getting through materials. They are designed, Ryan designed them to cut through steel, concrete, wood, synthetic materials, and so they are just tremendous breaching tools. And they are very lightweight, and in today's world where we have such a high risk of terrorism, that's very, very important for those people who find themselves in those situations.
It was the Air Force Special Operations group that ordered them. Right after they got them, 9/11 hit. And he called me up the day after 9/11 and he said, you need to get busy making these because this is something people are going to want. It turns out that group ended up giving a couple of their tomahawks to 5th Group Special Forces, who were some of the first 300 in Afghanistan. We also made and sold some tomahawks for 5th Group beyond that. And so we had tomahawks. The very first people going into Afghanistan were carrying our tomahawks. Here's a story that I think is very indicative of what we do. We had a gentleman come by the shop. He was visiting Chattanooga with his family, and he came by and said, man, I just want to thank you guys. I really appreciate the products you guys put out and what you guys do for us. And I said, well, how did you find out about us? He said, well, when I went to Iraq, my unit was taking over an area that a Special Forces group had secured. And he said, I was in a room with a guy who was Special Forces, and he had one of your tomahawks. And he said, he handed me your tomahawk and said, put a hole in this wall over here. And he said, we need a gun port. And he said, I looked at the Tomahawk, said, how am I going to do that? He said, just take the Tomahawk and put a hole in the wall. Okay, he said, I don't want to mess up your Tomahawk. He said, dude, just do it. See, so I picked up the Tomahawk and I went over and I punched a hole in the wall. You know, he said, I was amazed at how fast I could put a hole in the wall. And that's one of the common uses we see are gun ports and observation ports into walls with a spike. So he said when the Special Forces group was getting ready to leave, he said, look, just hang on to my Tomahawk. I'll get a new one when I go back to the stateside. You're going to need this. He said, when you leave, just give it to whoever's taking over your position. And so he said he carried it for that tour, and when his tour was over, he gave it to the next guy. And when he got back to the States, he ordered one and got one of his own. And he said that guy that he gave it to another person. And we know of several incidences where there's 4 or 5 generations of owners downrange in Afghanistan and Iraq who have carried the same Tomahawk and passed it on to the next guy. That speaks of the usefulness of the tool, but also the spirit of the warrior spirit that we see in our armed forces.
If you would like to know more about making Tomahawks, go to their website at rmjtactical.com. As Southern Snapshot continues, we'll head right here to top it off and meet a man who truly has a sweet job.